Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Welcome everybody and greetings to the 5th annual summit. I know a lot of you have been very active today in the Regenerative Tourism Hui, which thank you for participating in this, and also at this morning session for the opening. WOW is all about trying to help communities to traverse this wave of change that is coming, and we try to do it with a lot of fun, with a lot of good food, so I hope you enjoyed some, and then some lovely drinks there as well. But our objective is really to help, to inspire, to educate, and to enable us to get to this regenerative, beautiful, better future that we can see coming. It's just down a bit of a tunnel at the moment. But before I start, I just wanted to introduce myself, which usually I'm horrible at. I get to the end of it and I say, I forgot to say my name. So my name is Monique Kelly. I'm one of the trustees on WOW, and I'm the program director for this event. We have an amazing array of sponsors who have got behind us to pull this all together. So I just want to list them because I think that without them we would not be here, and I really respect the work that they're doing and hugely appreciate the support that they are giving to us and our team. So Lake Wānaka Tourism and Destination Queenstown in particular, with the Regional Events Fund. You guys rock. You have enabled us to get to where we are today, so thank you. MediaWorks and Crux, who have been incredible media partners for us. Greenhawk, QLDC, Rip-On for the wonderful wine and the venue today, thank you. FreshLink for the wonderful food that you've been able to eat. And Environmental Accounting Services. Thank you all for enabling this. Just a bit of housekeeping now, so phones off if you can. Toilets are just out the back if anybody wants to go to the toilet, and in case of fire, just follow the wardens, and there's a spot out by the car park just down here to go to. In that case, an earthquake, just hang on and let it rock, and we should be safe in here. So we do have a little bit of a change, and I think that most of you should have been notified. Unfortunately, Damon, his young daughter, one of her best friends died last week, and the funeral is at this moment, so our thoughts are really with him and his family and his daughter at the moment. He was incredible, and he took time out yesterday to talk with Carolyn Childs, who is a wonderful moderator and MC for this conversation, and they had the most inspiring, I almost came out of it in tears. It was absolutely incredible. So we've recorded it for us all to watch. Following that, we're going to ask Tim Bark, Ron Bull, Matt Woods, myself and Carolyn Childs to come up here, because we really felt coming out of it that we needed the opportunity to get our community to start talking, asking questions, seeing where we are going in this next part. I think that one of the biggest things that I took away from Damon was that need to connect as a community, to create that mycelium. It's the connection that we need. So please ask questions, and we have a way that we can do that. So we have menti.com. So if you have a phone, jump on to menti.com. So without further ado, what we're going to watch now is the conversation between Damon and Carolyn, and then we will, after that, have the Q&A. Thank you.
After that great film that we've just seen, I'm delighted to welcome the man behind it, which is filmmaker, activist, and storyteller Damon Gameau. Damon, welcome, and we're really sorry that we can't be doing this live, but we do have some great questions that people have posted in advance to go through this. So, Damon, in preparation for this interview, I watched your TED Talk, and you talked about the idea of storytelling and how storytelling can help us shape cultures, shape communities, and shape change. I guess for me, when I look at your background, one of the things that really caught my imagination was many people who do the things that you've done for a living, they have that as their kind of day job. And then when they're successful enough to feel like they have a voice, they become activists. But you've really embedded that activism into your main career as a filmmaker and as a storyteller. So can you tell me a little bit about the story of how that came to be, the journey that you took?
Yeah, so it really, I was acting for a long time, and to be honest, only ever had 2 or 3 experiences that I would consider as satisfying or enough to feel like I was contributing in some way. And they were films that were depictions of events that had happened, like significant moments in Australian history, and involved real people. And I got to spend time with the families and got to see, I guess, the integrity of storytelling when it's done properly, and how potent it can be as a tool to emotionally unlock things or bring awareness to certain political issues. And so I really loved that aspect of filmmaking, but just unfortunately for me, that wasn't the majority of jobs that you're getting offered. You have to sort of, those come along every now and again, and the rest just sort of really paying the bills. And I was fortunate enough to work with a few filmmakers that I really respect, and I think they really planted the seed in me of how important story is. And it was 2011, and we've got a film competition over here called Trop Fest, which is basically they get about 500,000 people around the country, go out into parklands with wine and biscuits and cheese, and they sit down and watch short films. And I made this film with my wife. She asked me we were doing this detox together, and we had 3 days of not really eating much. And I said, well, if we're going to do that, let's at least get our minds off that and do something creative. And so I wrote this song, which was called Animal Beatbox, and it was using animals as musical instruments. It was like super wacky. And I said, let's just make it and, you know, have fun with it. And then we did it. And she said, you've got to put that into Trop Fest. And I said, I am not putting that into Trop Fest, because it was, at the time, I was really trying to cultivate this suave, rolly smoking, velvet jacket wearing Lothario actor guy, and here I had to put out this incredibly dagging, true reflection of who I actually was. And so anyway, we put it out there. It got into the festival, and so I got to sit there in Sydney at the beautiful Domain on a classic night, 150,000 people watching the film. And all the other films were quite heavy that night and sort of serious in tone. And then this thing came on, and I just felt for the first time a huge amount of people, just their spirit lift, and just the joy that they saw on screen. I just felt this incredible ripple through me. And then it ended up winning, which was kind of bizarre, because it probably shouldn't have won. It was just little cutout animations. It cost $80, and there were films there that cost $150,000. So I got the beautiful experience of, wow, that actually won. And then the next day I got the classic, like, just Australian tall poppy thing. We're just like ripped apart for how the hell could this film win. So I got the perfect experience of putting yourself out there creative within a 24-hour period. But something happened that night in terms of just that collective response and what you can bring to people as they're watching something together. And so that really kickstarted this process of making this film I did called That Sugar Film years ago. And then when that was finished, again, I just, you know, had a bizarre experience where it was just taken on board by corporates and schools. I did a parliamentary screening with Jamie Oliver in the UK, which led to a sugary drinks tax. Same in New Zealand, we did a screening for the parliament there that led to some banning of sugary drinks in hospitals. So that was, again, just a story. It was just a 90-minute film, but this is what it can do to open people up and raise awareness. And so I think at that point, I really got the bug, and then haven't looked back really in terms of what I want to do, and haven't even acted for 10 years, and have just spent my life devoted to this and using stories to, I guess, to elicit an emotion in people, but then to make sure that emotion is translated into action. So I don't think it's enough just to tell stories anymore. They're very potent, but if you are going to elicit anger or fear or hope or inspiration, whatever it might be, we've just found a way to craft entry points for people that can take that and do something with it. So they don't just go on and live their lives and start scrolling Instagram and it's all forgotten. In that very moment when they're alive and they're reactive, how can you channel them into direct areas that align with their own passions or interests? And we did that in Sugar, but then definitely did that with 2040 and Regenerating Australia, which I've just done as well. So lots of learnings around that. In storytelling is great, but it's not enough on its own. If it's married to tangible action, then wow, it becomes an incredibly potent tool.
So you found that potent tool. You took yourself from that place of an unsatisfying experience into one where you felt that powerful change. There are so many things you could have talked about. So you talked about the Sugar film and how that changed one aspect of life. Why this move into this idea of regenerating Australia, obviously as an Australian? why that idea? Where did that place and that
Mm.
story come to be the story that you've made, the hero story or the lead narrative?
Yeah, so that was because of well, it was 2016, and we just had a third major bleaching event on the Great Barrier Reef within 5 or 6 years. And I was reading a paper in a cafe, and I maybe read 2 or 3 sentences of that bleaching event, and then turned the page and started reading the next article, and just caught myself and thought, wow, okay, I've got a daughter. That's a big existential problem, but I couldn't find a way to connect. There was nothing I didn't want to keep reading, because I thought, what can I do about it? It's completely out of my control. And so that, I guess, just started a bit of a investigation into the psychology of some of this messaging and how it works and how we respond to it as humans when it is so existential. And I found that really fascinating. And so that kind of led to this idea of, using different narrative approaches and trying to get people to see what it might look like on the other side of this crisis, that there are all these opportunities awaiting for us, where so many people are frustrated with this system, and they're overworked, and mental health's off the charts, and physical health, and all these different symptoms, that if you can actually sell a better system and a better story to people, then you might have a better chance of them getting involved and taking action. And so really had some profound metrics around that, of doing that in 2040 and showing it as a vision in the film, but then marrying it again to tangible action. So people could crowdfund to build a seaweed platform. They could mentor a girl online somewhere in the world. They could help farmers switch to regen ag, like all these different entry points. And we just saw people light up and help and give money and their time, because they suddenly, I guess, had a vision that they thought, yeah, I want that vision for my kids too, and I'm willing to get up and do something about it, rather than feeling this nihilistic overwhelm where it's just like, I can't do anything. I'm going to watch more Netflix and drink another bottle of wine, which is completely understandable, because it is. And that's where our messaging, I think, has been really lacking. Like we haven't been strategic enough, and I understand why, but this does stay in a political and scientific rhetoric. It gets stuck up there, and we move by stories, and we move by visions and hope of a better day tomorrow when we wake up. That's how we operate as humans. And yet here we are showing people graphs and using words like net zero and anthropogenic and negative emissions, and we all just go, what's that mean, and what do I do with that? Like, how do I get up and do net zero? Like, I don't know where to start. So I do think there's enormous role for storytellers in this moment that is really underutilized, and we have beautiful storytellers using their skills to make brilliant ads to convince people to buy more stuff, which is contributing to climate change, or they're making huge blockbusters that are distracting people. If we get more of those people to use some of their time doing this kind of work, I think we would move things much faster. And in terms of your question about regeneration as a concept, I mean, all of us can feel, especially during COVID in the last few years, that the global system, the fragility of that system has been laid bare. And we're seeing it now with Russia and Ukraine and supply chains. And I think people are realizing that, we've spent 150, 200 years building this enormous, complex industrial system at a time of where cheap, efficient energy. We awoken this fossil fuel army to do our work. We had boundless finance. Everyone could borrow money, materials, there was no limit on that. Hey, let's just keep going. And now suddenly, and in a period of ecological stability, and now suddenly we've hit this moment where we're very vulnerable. We're going to have more climate shocks. We're going to have more geopolitical shocks. All our countries are in debt. We're hitting up against material boundaries that it's crazy to think that we can keep just doing this thing that we've been doing. And we all feel it. We just don't know how to express it or what to do about it. But the idea of regeneration says, well, there is a better world, and we can start to bring that up and strengthen our communities and localize and make more resilience in our regions for food and energy and manufacturing and connection. And the hope is that as the other one continues to unravel, which it's going to do in the next sort of 5-10 years, that this new one can emerge at the same time, so that we don't crash the plane into the mountain. We land it gently in the field. We don't have people freaking out and panicking because suddenly they can't do all the things they used to do. We've got lots of people preparing and showing leadership in their communities to say, no, it's okay. There's a better world right here. It's always been here. You just didn't realize it because you were watching Netflix and scrolling all the time. But all these people have been preparing it, and it's going to be much better for your kids and for all living things. And so that's the work that we do and is happening all around the world now. These people starting to think regeneratively, just to do that work. And that's why it's so exciting. It's inclusive. There's no leadership. It's that hero narrative is dead. Like there is no Elon Musk. This is a community. We're not going to do this unless everyone plays their part. And that's what we're all craving, I think, deep down, even if we can't express it just yet.
And I think that that's very much, I mean, all of my work, as you know, is in tourism. And we've really seen that with tourism, that we had this traditional model. I think Anna Pollock, who's, you know, one of the mothers of regenerative tourism, talks about this idea of strip mining communities, and bringing that through. And, you know, the last few years, we have been that you know, every single one of these crises has affected tourism. And we've seen this sense of communities feeling that tourism was done to them, not by them or for them. Now, I know, Damon, that in your work now, you're working with communities in some of this regenerative space. Help us start that journey. Maybe not a hero's journey, because the hero in this is the community, but what is the start of that journey? How can people who feel that we've lost that balance not go back to scrolling Netflix? I would say having a glass of wine, but sat here in I don't know, I'm very much hoping to have a glass of wine.
I know what you mean.
How do we start that journey? Where does it come from? How do communities build that?
Well, I think it's a tricky one to answer, because part of the reason we're in the mess that we're in, and there's been great benefits, but we have had a largely prescriptive top-down hierarchical approach to everything. You hear this term all the time. Is it scalable? Whereas regeneration is kind of the opposite of that. It actually, there isn't a sort of simple answer for everyone. There isn't that prescriptive approach. It's actually saying to a community, what is it about your unique place that makes it what it is? That's regeneration. Understanding the cultural history, Indigenous stories, ecology, all the things that make up your place, and then letting that be your greatest strength. Instead of this ridiculous monopolizing that we've done and homogenizing that we've done in this system, which is antithetical to life. You think about the diversity and the richness of a forest, which we just shed and plant soy or sugar. Like, we've done that everywhere with our music, with our culture. We've taken the diversity and the richness and just turned it into homogenized one thing. And so the same goes for tourism or this, you know, but we've got to actually find these things of saying, what is it about our place that is really different? And let's just play on that strength and own it and discuss it as a community. And so, as you alluded to, the project we've just done is called Regenerating Australia. And it started by an interview process with coal workers, tradies, Indigenous groups, farmers. This was over 4 months. We did interviews in 2020. That because that's what's been missing in our current system, like care, and dare I say it, love, because that's a dirty word in the capitalist structure, but loving your place and loving your fellow community members and what makes your place so beautiful. And then starting from that place and then moving there together. And then you design something completely different with that set of values at the core.
And that's actually one of the questions we have, that you talked about that passion and that love of place. And you know, I have to say, when Wānaka, that I first came here in 1996, and I really did think it was paradise. So the question was, we're blessed to have a community of very passionate individuals and organizations, that love of place, as you said. How can we as a community best foster that collaboration to amplify the work that we're trying to undertake and ensure that we do move that forward together? You know, how does that work, Damon?
I mean, it's hard to push this on people. It's an invitation, I guess, really. It's all I can speak of is what's happened to us in the communities when we've taken our own Australia. Is that,
we'd love to hear that.
Yeah, bubbling under the surface is a deep need for it. Like, people can't express it, but even when we did this interview process, the number one word was community. That's the number one word that people said. I miss a sense of community, you know. And even the horrors of the fires that we had here and the floods, the silver lining for everyone was that everyone was out doing meal runs for each other and helping, and like the spirit that they love. And then after the fires, when COVID hit, everyone went back inside. They got on Facebook. They all developed their own narrative, and all that community fell apart. So people were desperate for that. So it's just about, I guess, first honoring that and having not fearing that, Like that, if you actually go out and own that, you'll be surprised how many people do want it. They've got their own walls up and their own blocks, but underneath, they're desperate for it. We're all wanting much better connection from this hyper individualized system. And so then it's just finding the ways to do that so that you are creating spaces to bring in, like if you have a core circle of people in your community that already want to do this and they're aligned, that's great. What are the steps to just widen that circle a little bit and make people feel comfortable? Then you go a little bit wider. And soon, and people are talking about it, they're going, have you heard about that thing? I think about it. And it's a feeling. People are leaving that room going, this feels different. Like I felt safe there. I really connected with these people. I wasn't preached at. My voice was heard. I could contribute to my place. That's how you grow your circle wider and wider. And then 6 months, a year from now, who knows what's happened? And we've seen that already. There's a thriving regenerative Brisbane, regenerative Sydney, regenerative Melbourne group, regenerative Gippsland, regenerative Tasmania. It's all happened in the last 5 months because people understand and they can feel the validity of what we're trying to do, and it is different and it is coming from a different place. So I just making sure that you own that. I've just got a little 3-year-old that's just crept in.
That's all right.
Pause 1 second.
Okay.
It's cool. Can you come out with that? Thank you.
Oh, I was kind of hoping that they might stay and be part of the interview. There's that future. But it's funny, just before you went, Damon, we were just talking here about, you've referenced that kind of Netflix and that anesthetizing effect of social media. Now, one of the questions is, and you talked about, and it kind of nicely segues to that thing you were talking about the Regenerate Sydney, which is that here in Wānaka, there's a Regenerative Wānaka Facebook page.
Right.
And, you know, it says, how can we use this to create that fostering of community and regeneration and biotic? So how can we take, you know, those almost addictive powers and that numbing, addictive powers of social media and turn them to good, to get rid of that numbing effect and build community? Have you got any examples from the community you're talking to about how that works and how that can be part of how we foster those conversations?
Yeah, look, it's a real challenge on our current social media models because they're obviously incentivized for the opposite. You know, there isn't conciliatory processes there. It's actually to tribalize and divide. And so all the algorithms are messed up there. And so there are stories and we've tried to do it ourselves. And there's steps you can take around moderation and being really clear with sort of boundaries and then really encouraging certain types of conversations. But I'm not sure how far we're going to get in that paradigm. We've been working with a group out of Israel and America who've just set up, and we're just about to launch it actually. It's called Planet, and it's an app with which what you mentioned, it's completely incentivizes the opposite. Like you get rewarded for collaboration, cross-pollinations. You can set up your own pods in your community. You can reach out to other pods to learn. You can do collective decision-making. It's all engineered to bring people together and make stuff and take action. So we're going to trial that and hope that, you know, that does well. So I'd encourage everyone to look out for that in the next couple of weeks. But really it is about the tone you set, that people are so used to now going on social media and it's just divisive and that's normalized now. So even if you are going to hold this space on a Facebook group, I'll just make sure that you set the boundary at the top so that everyone knows, and then you just really moderate it carefully because, you know, we are fallible, we're humans, you know, but as long as there's a gentle approach to say, hey, on this page, we apply these principles and we deeply care for each other and you can stay here, but just there are rules. And if you do that in a nice, gentle way, certainly we've found that the conversation does hold, but it takes work. You know, people aren't used to that and they get on there and they're just super reactive. So it does take a bit of moderation if you need to put the time into it.
And there is almost a kind of contradiction in that, as you say. So you've got, in this one sense, there are these rules, but in that other sense of this, everyone's included, everyone is welcome. I mean, I was interested with Regenerate because, you know, I'm also based in Australia normally, and we have this issue where, you know, there's this sense that mining communities are pitted against farming communities, are pitted against city communities. What have you found? Are there any common traits in how we bring people who've got very diverse life experiences, very diverse voices together to deliver that? Yeah, I think we've just got to understand that we've all been played, especially in this country, we've been played. That narrative has been shaped for us that we are against these people and whatnot. And that's, you know, obviously selling huge amounts of money for various organizations that profit from that.
which is a great shame, and the attention economy itself of Facebook and Twitter and all those models. They want to keep you engaged on site as long as possible. So they're activating your limbic system as much as you can. So you can't let it go, and you've got to keep on there. And it's brilliantly done, but look what it's doing to our sense of self and to our democracy. We know all this stuff. So I think we do need a very adult conversation about different platforms if we're going to get through what we have to get through. And so I try and spend as little time on those as possible, or even engage or comment, because I just find that people aren't even themselves on there anymore. Even people I respect on Twitter that I know personally, it has incentivized a different form of behavior for them to get likes, to get shares. And so, you know, I wish that you had to read your last 20 tweets at your obituary, like at your funeral. I think, like, hold people account to what they're actually saying online, because it's just ridiculous, especially some of these scientists I know and really respect. They're just being pulled down to this total sort of animalistic warfare. And I get why. I understand it's very tempting, but I don't think it's the way forward. I don't think it's kindness. The illusion of winning when you're getting all these likes is actually not a win at all, because you're othering someone else and you're ostracizing them to get all that win. So it's a bit of a false illusion anyway. So there's a lot of work to do.
So do you think we bring that conversation about that not othering, is that part of how we do it?
That is regeneration. Like,
yeah,
this whole system we've built, especially that you've seen the TED Talk, scientific revolution, even the early forms of Christianity too, is othering. It's othering the world. It's dominion over the earth. It's conquering nature. It's conquering each other. That's been our underlying story, or our set of values, for so long. And it's ridiculous, and it's destroying us, and it's destroying everything we love. And we don't have any sense of the preciousness of life anymore. And that's all we have. Like, it's so sacred. It's so beautiful. And yet we're so flippant with it. And the way we speak to each other online, the way we treat the natural world, it's appalling, because we've lost that sense. We've lost those values. So unless we change that story, and it's a very new story, this separate one, you know, like, for most of our existence as humans, we've had a deeply collaborative sense of the living world and each other. You look at even the way that hierarchies worked in some of the tribes, early hunter-gatherer tribes. If you were the one that was the sociopath that came back with the big boar on your shoulder and said, "Hey, everyone, look, I caught a boar," you got laughed, you got ridiculed, ostracized, sometimes even killed, because it would destabilize the harmony of the group. And yet now we give that person the presidency or the keys to the office or the CEO. Like, we reward sociopathy. It's madness. And so here we are now with this guy in Russia, who's one of the maddest of all, holding us all to ransom with a mute button because we let a sociopath. I mean, it's ridiculous when you actually see it. So
we need to manage that process of how societies interact in that way.
Exactly. That's regenerative. That's the core of it. It's like, get that underlying story right, and suddenly you design buildings differently. Suddenly your cities look differently. Suddenly your social media interactions are different. But when it's built on a story of separation, othering, better than, rivalrous dynamics, no wonder we're in the mess that we're in. But people don't see that. We're trying to tinker around the edges, and we're trying to have another tech fix, and we could just get this right. But it's like, no. The system itself is flawed. The architecture at its fundamental levels needs to change. And that might be a multi-generational thing, but we've got to start now. We've got to start somewhere. And I often think that it's, you know, this work we're doing, we might not see the benefits in our lifetime, but it's not for us. You know, it's for the things to come. It's that we've started this regenerative journey because we've seen the destruction, the extractive, degenerative system we've created, that now's the time we start to turn it around.
I'm actually thinking, from what you're doing, that one exercise I might get to do with people is maybe not their tweets, but get any organization to write its obituary and what would you like said at your funeral. And we've used that in other contexts.
Yeah, it's lovely.
It's quite interesting.
And then see how that's aligned with their values and what they're actually doing. You know, like, how do you want to be remembered? What's your legacy piece long term versus what destructive behaviors you're doing in this moment?
And I mean, I guess one other thing that I picked up from the TED Talk, you talked about Father Francis Bacon, the father of science and nature at the service of science. But now scientists within this relatively short time frame have moved from being the people who are doing that othering to the people who are helping us unpick those stories of connectivity. Now, as someone who my whole working life has been around the use of evidence and how we use evidence. And of course, one of the things we know is that the governments and structures, they want to say, how do we know we've succeeded? So how do we bring science and evidence to the service of this vision as opposed to this othering of the vision? How do we measure what we're doing to say that we're getting there? Should we be measuring even?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, certainly if we're going to measure, it has to be befitting of the complexity of the system. Right now, it's just an embarrassingly narrow slice of who we are, this one financial metric. But yes, the question of whether we should be measuring anything at all but I think we'll have to do that as a transition because we're so wired for that. It's so inbuilt in our story right now. But I think that what we're seeing, well, how I measure it is, I think regenerative agriculture is a great example where you look at this conventional system or this conventional practice, fighting nature, using excess chemicals, destroying the soil. When these farmers start to make the transition, there's all these things you can measure about the biodiversity that comes back on their landscapes, the amount of water that they can suddenly hold in that soil as it's healthier, the nutrient density and the quality of their food, which is now measurable, which is extraordinary. And there's the other one, which we haven't measured, which is what Nora Bateson talks about, the warm data. It's actually the transformation of the farmer themselves. And that's where I get so emotional. I spend so many times with these farmers who just, their life has completely changed because their landscape's changed. They say to me, I've spent my whole life getting up every day killing stuff. That's what my job was. And then I just had this moment of like, really? And now I work with the land and I bring it back to life. And to see the sense of meaning and purpose and legacy in them, especially in our countries, where the, suicide rates are, just have been devastating. Yeah. To watch a farmer actually be on this abundant, thriving landscape and him to have ownership of that and contribute to that. Like, how do you measure that? Like, that's a tricky one. And I see that happening everywhere in this regenerative space. These scientists that are bringing back kelp forests, Indigenous-led communities that are giving rights to their rivers. Like, that's the stuff you measure. You just look at their beaming faces, or that they are so excited to get up every day because they're making the world a better place in a genuine way. And they can see it and they can feel it, and it's infectious. So that's the story we've got to get out to people, I think, about regeneration, is that, yeah, it's great for landscape. All that stuff's wonderful. But it's actually what it does to a person and how it regenerates their own spirit.
And what might be those warm data measures and some of those measures for communities for whom tourism is a major part of that? So if we look at regenerative tourism versus that's an interesting binary in itself, isn't it? We look at regenerative tourism as part of this conversation. What's our warm data? What are our, what's our biodiversity measure? What's our water use measure? What measures? Yeah. You've worked with a number of communities where tourism, I think you mentioned Norfolk Island, for example, that tourism is a big part of how people earn their living.
Yeah.
Big part of their lives in every way, shape and form, for both good and ill. What are the warm data what are those measures?
Yeah, look, it's the warm is the hard. The warm is hard because it's intangible, but it is in a time of absolute chaos and freneticism. I feel like at the moment, and I'm speaking naively because it's your industry, but when I speak to people about regenerative tourism, it feels like it's like, well, we've offset our travel and we've sort of gone to this place that uses no plastic, and that's all great. And that's really important. I would say don't offset, onset. Like, offset's not enough. We've actually got to go beyond offsetting, but that's a different conversation. We've got to give back more than we have. But I think the beautiful thing of regenerative tourism is, like, it's that thing we talked about of the spirit or the heart. It's like in a time of chaos, what can we offer people to actually stop and legitimately stop and slow down and not be tempted to get on your phone, but actually reconnect with yourself or your family and your loved ones or with nature? Like, that's almost the most important thing we can all be doing right now. While we still race to invent the tech and all these things, like, that's not it, because we're going faster and faster. All that tech needs more energy, which we're blind to, needs more material use, which we're blind to. Our ability right now, our demand for energy is outracing our ability to put renewables by over half. So it's like trying to plug a hole in the boat, but at the same time, you're making the hole bigger at the same time. It's ridiculous. Like when we're actually, what we need to do, how we decarbonize really quickly is we slow them down. And everyone goes, all right, do we really need to be making all this stuff that ends up in landfill 6 months later? Or these mega yachts and these foot spas, all this stuff. Like, it's hilarious when you look at it. It's like, what do we actually want to use our energy for? And then we've got enough energy to meet human needs and connect. So that, to me, is regenerative tourism. It's getting people to think differently. And actually, we want to create a space where you can regenerate yourself, because then you go back into the world and you're a better person, and people feel that, as opposed to this kind of cramming in a holiday and I did a few things. Like, that's not it. It's actually the deeper layer of it. So all that other stuff is nice for the environment, really important, but how can you cultivate an experience for people where they actually get to reconnect with themselves again? That's what we need more of in the world.
Yeah, and I mean, the other thing, and I guess I touched on it when that word versus snuck in, which is, and you've talked about this making progress. I mean, all of us were educated in that scientific othering of nature, ideas of binaries. And I know this is something I struggle with myself, so I'm going to put my hand up. This is a struggle for me too, partly because I've made a career very successfully from doing that, which is trying to think how we're going to hit roadblocks in this process. And you've now worked with so many communities, Damon. How do we manage when we hit when things, how do we keep going? Because this is, as you say, it's a process that we may not see the end. We sometimes, I've heard Rick Antonsen, who used to be CEO of Vancouver, say, we need cathedral thinking. The people who built Europe's great cathedral,
right.
They didn't even build them for their grandchildren. And this idea. So how do we keep going when there are siren voices against us? There are voices within ourselves that want to revert back to those own mentality. Yeah. How are the communities that you're working with doing that?
Yeah, well, I think the cathedral analogy is great, isn't it? Because there would have been so many moments where archways failed or windows didn't go in or things fell down and people got hurt, but they all then made the next layers higher and up more stronger, and those lessons were learned. And it's the same with this walk of communities and regeneration. It's very new. Well, it isn't really, it's a very old story, but in terms of what we're doing, it's very new. So we actually need people to be the leaders and the pioneers and go out there and make those mistakes, because the world will eventually get here. This is I guess what I want to make really clear is that because of our ecology, because of what we're doing to the living world, because of climate, this will be one of the largest movements of all time. Paul Hawken will probably talk about this. Because of that weather, that we're going to get more intensity. It's going to keep happening until people go, whoa, my God, right, this is real now. What do we do? And then they'll turn to more local solutions. They'll turn to their communities. And if we've got these people that have done the work, as I said before, they're going to be the leaders, the regenerative leaders that can hold that space and say, hey, I've been where you are. I get it. It's going to be okay. Come this way and let's all do this together. So that's the work for me. It's the beautiful thing of life, isn't it? That we need people to make mistakes and fall down and fail, because then we become more resilient, become much better at what we're doing. And it's painful. But as I said, if you don't think about it as yourself, which I don't, I think of historians. I love that idea of historians 300 years from now, looking back to this time and going, wow, amongst all that chaos and nihilism, that there were people that wanted to walk off in a different direction and start and plant the seeds of a regenerative, thriving future for 300 years from now. Like, what a beautiful thing to do with your time. So that's what keeps me going. That's what keeps all the communities I'm working with and have seen. And you know what? The benefits are there for them. The minute you start connecting with people in your community, building something together, making it a better place, it's the magic that happens that you can't describe until you've done it yourself and felt it and experienced it. And I think people desperately want that right now. I mean, we're in a meaning crisis. Religion's failed us. Materialism has failed us. People have got this void and they're like, what the hell do I do with this? I'll look for narratives online so that I can feel more secure. But underneath that, they're craving meaning. And what could be more meaningful than regenerating our planet? Like, there's nothing else more meaningful than that. And regenerating your communities and reconnecting with humans, our fellow human beings. Like, I think it's a no-brainer. And we've just got to tell that story and get that message out there that it's all a welcome. And it doesn't matter whether you're a farmer or a coal worker or what you do, you're a human being and you're welcome in this beautiful, inclusive group.
I think, and that's really great. I mean, there's a couple of other things that I picked up, and again, it's how we nuance this message, because you've talked about leadership. And now one of the things that and this is something that I see with a lot of tourism communities that I work with, this is not unique to where I'm sat today, is this idea that there's one central body that does tourism, whether it's the tourism organization. You know, how do we get the community to stop thinking, oh, well, that's the job of, you know, Wānaka Tourism or Queenstown Tourism or Destination New South Wales, where both you and I are based? How do we get people to bring that together? How do we practice that in our communities, in our businesses, as individuals? How do we do that?
Yeah, well, I think the obvious thing is the awareness, is that most people just have no idea this exists yet, or that this is even possible. And even on our tour, we had people say that, you know, a couple of people that had come from the UK and didn't even know what community was. They're like, what does community actually mean? Like, how do you describe it? You know, so there is education there to do. But I think it's through experience. Like, as much as you can convene nights and show films and bring people together, get them offline and come into a room and share and talk. And like, that's how you grow this. This is the only way we're going to grow this. We're not going to do it in our silos online. It's about inviting all these different groups of your community to find ways to collaborate. And one of the best things of Regenerating Australia was that often we'd end the night, we'd say, right, you know, put up your hand if you're a leader of a particular group here, and someone would say, look, I did an urban food project, I'm doing this, you know, rent and repair shop. And suddenly people look around and just be like, there are 150 people in my town that I didn't know that are already doing this stuff. Why the hell haven't we caught up? And so we just sneak out the back door as the whole cinema was turned in on itself, just buzzing and swapping phone numbers, you know. So we just don't take the time to stop and think, you know what, there's a huge majority of people in our communities that want something different. They don't know what it is. They don't know how to express it. But if you put out that invitation and it's got the right intention with that invitation, you know, you'll be surprised who turns up. You know, it might not be week one, but eventually that thing builds, because you've just got to trust that we're all craving it. And even the people that say they're really happy, you know, I challenge them deep down to really talk about that, because you know, we're not as connected as we were, and people, that's who we are. We're social animals. We're desperate to connect, and we're trying to connect online because we think that's the way, but it's such a false equivalent.
And well, actually, the good news on that, Damon, is by the time this video plays tomorrow, we will have had that conversation, because the exercise we're doing is we're trying to map that constellation of you're doing this here and you're doing
awesome.
that. So that's any tips for us, because I can take those in, so we can kind of bend time a little bit here, you know.
Yeah.
I can be Jodie Whittaker and Doctor Who for a moment and bend time here a little bit. So any tips for us that we bring into that Constellation Act? Any common traits that you've seen in the communities that you've done that have worked when you suddenly have those people? What makes those people leap up and say, I've got an urban food project that sits under here?
Well, it's having a vision, I think, of like, because otherwise, you know, people sort of have their own view of what the town should look like or what people should do. So there needs to be a discussion there to create, I guess, for people to feel they're heard, and it's not just a sort of this radical lefty vision of the future, or like all these other aspects. They have to feel that their future is relevant and heard. So that's why in the communities we work with, we often do that as the first point, because they know the strengths and the values of their town, and they say, well, this is, you know, we do really good food here, and we'd love to think that's going to be healthy in 10 years, and we've also got this big community battery thing here. And so let them do that sort of work together, and then people start to find their roles and what they can play in bringing that vision to life. But if you're not all agreeing on that, then that's when you get the schism. So there's just obviously some deliberation has to occur, and some, you know, letting go of certain things, but I'd say that's one of the most important things. What are we all united on that we want for our region around tourism?
Well, the good news is we've got those conversations have already begun,
Yeah.
And we've got this kind of agreed vision, which is this idea of tourism for a better future. Series of things. So we'll be mapping out the things that link to the pillars of that in terms of what's going on. I suppose so then this exercise is around using that to leverage that inspiration. So I think that's going to be very, very exciting. The other thing I guess I wanted to touch on, one part of this that I think many of your experiences with this idea of community, is that part of this is going to be a community fund, and Ash, who is going to lead that initiative, will be talking about some aspects of that in the conversation. And if we play this, we'll have talked about that. Any tips on, leveraging the idea of, a community fund that links visitors to locals to support things? Is this something that you've come across in your work, Damon, and what would that look like?
Look, it's massive. It's gaining such traction in different forms at the moment around the world. It's been around in something called participatory budgeting or participatory democracy for a long time. You might have seen even recently Emmanuel Macron in France, as a response to the Yellow Vest movement and whatnot, did a huge call out. I think they had 20,000 people that they wanted to join this committee, and they whittled it down to 150, representing lots of different members of the community. And he basically said, we'll enact whatever policies you come up with. Take the time, work with experts. But he just really handed over this sense of deliberation and decentralized the power. Obviously, there were caveats around this sort of thing, but that's sort of happening a lot in communities. And what we did with Regenerating Australia was that WWF had put up a $2 million fund so that any community we went to, we said, right, like, what did you like about that film? And is there something there that's relevant to your place? And we've got some subject matter experts that can work with you to develop the idea and apply for it. Here's grants, 50, 150, 200K. And just the quality of the ideas that emerged. I think we had almost 100 in round one, and round two is now open. And like 80% of them, 85% of them are you just want to fund them all, because people are suddenly thinking so differently when they understand those principles of regeneration, of like community ownership, community care, governance, looking after nature. Like it just unlocks all this different thinking. So just such a diverse range of ideas based on that town and what's right for that town, whether it's a fishing industry or whether it's an Indigenous community, like really different ways of thinking. So it's just empowering, I think, at a time where people feel so despondent. They're so fed up with politics and the system and how it's working, that they want to do things their own way and based on their community. And we've seen it in Australia. We've had a revolution here in our democracy, really, where we've had community independence. We had 11 of them enter our parliament at this election, and we're going to have more in the next, because they're not stopping. It's just gaining so much momentum because people suddenly said, okay, I'm sick of this system. I want someone that really represents our community. And now we can put that person into the halls of power. And they've seen it happen. And now they've seen it happen 11 more times. And so that, to me, that's regeneration. That's regenerative democracy in action. It's not prescriptive top-down party. It's like, no, the people of this particular area want this for their area because they know it better than any politician could ever tell them. And that's kind of what this whole thing's about, So I think it's the same with these funding models or whatever it might be. What do the people want with that? What do they want to do with that money? And you find that most times it's like improving nature, planting more local food, bike paths, more play areas. Like nearly every time when the people are given the money, that's what they come up with. And they found particularly that when there's actually meaningful amounts of money, if it's just a token, then people go, I don't trust it. I'm too cynical. Politics, this isn't real. But if they're really given the money and said, you can do what you want with it, they're much more inclined to do the deeper research, talk to the right people, and take it seriously on behalf of their communities.
Actually, that reference, and for those people who are listening who don't understand this, the idea of the teals, these independents, they're actually a nice example. So you talk about that grounded in local community, but there were a series of principles about how the teals worked. And I don't want to say a playbook because it wasn't a playbook, but there were some general principles. So it might be helpful for people to understand how that you kind of balance that. What are the things that we know work, which are those common traits, versus what are the things that we, that are local and unique to us, and how do we bring those common traits that worked for all of the teals into that local thing. Anything that you'd like to add on that could help people?
Yeah. Well,
hear
it started before the Teals. It started with there was a jurisdiction called Indi in Victoria, and a woman named Cathy McGowan. Really, I mean, it started a little bit before her, but that was basically the first time where people just got fed up and they said, we don't want a politician, we just want someone from our local community. And Cathy was a real powerhouse in her community doing all sorts of different things. And suddenly I think it was her grandkids actually said to her, why don't you run? You run. And she was like, there's no way I'm running, this. And sure enough, they helped her online with the campaign. The whole thing built this momentum. And suddenly Cathy McGowan was in Parliament House and representing her community and standing up to these politicians saying, no, we don't want that here. I've gone and spoken to my people. In fact, she was rotating. She would take 5 or 10 people into Parliament House every sitting to get them to experience what Parliament House was like and to get the next potential candidates ready to understand how it all works. So just a beautiful system. And I think that because we're so disillusioned and frustrated with our politics here, and we've been stuck for so long, especially on climate environmental action, that we had this real resurgence of similar independence. So Cathy started doing these seminars and they'd get 200 people, and then these other sort of leading figures, a lot of them women, professional women, that said, you know what, I'm going to stand up for my community as well. And so suddenly we just saw this happen over a couple of years. And they all sort of loosely agreed to some basic values, which was they want obviously transparency in our politics, more gender equality, particularly climate action, because they were just so frustrated. So they really targeted some of our more right-leaning conservative liberals who just weren't taking climate action. And those are the ones that they kicked out. So really, I think we'll look back at it as a historic moment for what it's done. But it's again, as you said, it's like, it's localized democracy. It's community-based democracy. And again, it's so important, as we talked about, this incredibly complex system we've built right now, to think that anyone can make those decisions from a centralized location, is kind of crazy. It's that we need to really rethink how we make decisions, because the people in those communities like yours understand them better than anyone else. And to be told what to do by a state government or a federal one is kind of madness now. It might have worked 150 years ago, we get it, but it was a simpler time. It was much easier to do that. Now it's just out of control, and we're trying to use those same models. So I think we just need to move with the times there. And I think we might not do that voluntarily. I think that'll be forced upon us by what's happening, that the big centralized, globalized system is unraveling. And the only way forward is going to be to localize and know our community better, vote for politicians in our own community, think about our energy and our manufacturing, because that's the other thing that no one's going to see coming, is that even this device I'm talking to you on right now, 10,000 parts built on 6 different continents. That's a massive supply chain network in a period of ecological, instability. So we need to be really grown up about what things we're going to be able to access in 10, 15 years from now. We're going to be able to push a button on Amazon and get something within 24 hours? Unlikely. So what are we going to be able to do to make sure we're really strengthening our local resilience and building the things we need and that we value and that bring us happiness, not just stuff that trigger dopamine and then they're in landfill, 6 months later. That stuff has to stop, because it's killing the planet and our own connection.
Great. Well, look, I could honestly talk to you about this all day, but somebody has been kind of waving fingers at me for minutes to talk left. Damon, and I'm very conscious you've been very generous with your time at what is, I know, quite a difficult time for you, which is why we're not doing this live. I guess if we turn it back, so, the communities here, Wānaka, Queenstown, the Southern Lakes, have decided they want to embark on this regenerative future, and they've started those conversations. What else can you tell them from your experience that will really help them, take it through to that next stage?
I just want to acknowledge them and honor them for doing the work, because this is the work. There's nothing more important than regeneration in this moment. It's our only meaningful pathway that we've got left. Sustainability is not an option anymore. We've got to regenerate to get to sustainability. We've done so much damage. So I just want to, thank those people and encourage them to keep going, because we need leaders in this moment. And that's real leadership, that work. And it might not be getting the attention it deserves right now, but there will come a time where it will be the most important and people will be so grateful. Just a lot of people can't see it just yet, but that's coming. And so we've just got to do the work and keep going and get up every day and just think of those historians in 300 years from now that will look back and go, wow. Like, and I think potentially this next 50 to 100 years could be incredibly exciting. I mean, again, you don't get to change history very often as a species, as humans, you know, and we're going to live through that. We're seeing a transformation of our energy. We're seeing it happen in our agriculture right around the world. That there's a celebration to that. And I think that's the key of regeneration to make it attractive. It's got to be celebratory. It is life, after all. It's honoring and prioritizing life. Regeneration is the default mode of life, from a forest to our cells. It's just what nature does. So why not do it and celebrate doing it?
You can see why, I don't know if anybody asked, but why we were just going, wow, and it probably exploded your mind and thought, I've got so many questions now. So this is why I would like to invite Carolyn Childs up. Carolyn has, from her own words, is beginning on this path of regeneration and is not an expert, but has definitely been working in this area and has been instrumental in today's work, as well as the work of other communities, and including ours in both Australia and New Zealand. So shall I hand it over to you?
Yeah, hello. Yeah, I'm very happy if you get everyone else, Monique, so why don't you do that?
Okay. Ron Bull, I will ask to come up to the stage as well. Ron is joining us for the whole week. He is a lecturer at Otago Polytechnic, as well as being a very good friend. He is from Aparima down south, and will be joining us with Tim Bark, GM of Lake Wānaka Tourism, and also Matt Woods, GM of DQ.
Hello again, Tim. Hello. Okay, I think my biggest part of the journey was sitting there watching myself for an hour. I don't know if you've ever done that, but it's a pretty nerve-wracking experience. Just a quick reminder, you can see behind you that we have the Menti question structure. So please, can you head to www.menti.com, enter that code. I just want to confirm that is the same code that we've had all day, isn't it? So I'm still in there. So if you see me looking at my phone, I'm not being rude. I'm actually trying to moderate and bring some of those questions together. So just wanted to take through some of those questions. Please do share. I think, can people who are on the live stream also enter questions? Just to confirm that you will all be able to enter questions, and we're going to get right into it. So obviously you heard, very sadly, Damon couldn't join us today because of the horrendous timing. One of the things he said to me after the call, that you heard that comment about life, and that's what he said, this is what regeneration is, and this is why we're doing it, is to celebrate life. So I guess particular thanks to those of you who sat and listened to me talk all day and you know, be kind of bringing you together and talking about some of these things. But I thought one of the things I might do is just ask all of the panel, I don't mind in the order. We had a bit of planned anarchy earlier today, so I'm quite happy if we have a little more planned anarchy and we don't go dob, 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 dob. Things that you took out of that for what your task in this journey of regeneration for this region, what are the things that you heard from that you're really going to take out? As you said, Monique, it's mind-blowing, but if we could just pick 2 or 3 of those things that you would say, these are the things that I'm now going to apply to the journey of regeneration that we've got in this community.
I think 2 of the things that I actually really took out of it, first of all, was redefining the paradigm about what tourism is actually about. And Damon said a lot about, you know, this is to fill people's cup. And my first job was in employment law with the UN, with the International Labour Organization. And it was an organization set up in the early 20th century, 1919, after that First World War. And it was really a push against capitalist structure that was really showing some huge faults in the way it treated workers. And so the ILO was set up in order to instigate some of the social foundation that we needed for workers. And one of the first conventions that was actually ever adopted was holidays. That when you are actually working and you're trying to work in the system, you need to have time out to regenerate yourself as an individual. So if we shift the paradigm of what the purpose of tourism is about as to being in the well-being sector, it shifts minds about what you're actually delivering. So if you are an operator, how are we filling people's cups when they come to us? How are we enabling them to regenerate themselves? I think that was one of the biggest things, and I will hand it over to somebody else, but that was the one thing that I thought shift the paradigm.
Tim, you're sort of looking a bit ready to...
Always ready. I think one of the biggest things that I took out of it was that it's not actually something new. It's something that many of us have been lucky enough to be brought up in. And I mean, I can only speak for myself, but where I grew up, how I grew up, the people I grew up with, a lot of what we're talking about with, you know, the word regeneration is what we were doing growing up. It's just, it makes you realize that we've actually, this isn't something new, it's something that we've lost. And something that, you know, the stories that we got told as we're growing up, and, you know, I'm just getting flashbacks of my grandmother and my mother and my grandfather, and everything that we did, a lot of it was to do with sustaining ourselves and our families, so it was gathering food and sharing that food, and the aroha and kai was synonymous with the way of life. And as part of that, we knew that if we collected more than what we, you know, what the resources could supply, that we wouldn't be able to continue that, you know, we'd starve. So as I got into tourism, and I've been in it 30 odd years now, my initial trades were scuba diving and fishing, and skippering boats and charter fishing and stuff. And it was those same things that I loved doing it, that's why I got into tourism, but being able to share with people the reason why we do things in a certain way, and share the stories of how people taught me and why they taught me those lessons. That's been really valuable for me. So again, going back to what I really got out of this talk was reminding me that actually this is all around us, and it's not something new, it's just something that has been lost along the way, and we're rediscovering it. So sharing that is, I think, what our role is. And the other thing was satisfaction to know that we're not doing this on our own. There's a lot of us all pulling the boat in the same direction.
Bill, would you like to?
Kia ora, yes, I will, yeah, thank you. It was really interesting listening to that conversation there about that reconnecting as communities. For me, I'm in the luxurious position of always being connected to the community, that iwi community, that Indigenous community that I'm from, but even further than that, connected to that landscape that holds, and when I talk about iwi, I'm talking about iwi as in bones. We sometimes think about iwi as in a socio-political grouping of peoples, and it is. But iwi is also those bones. It's a dual meaning in there. Those bones of those people that are in me, that DNA that's in me, that's also in the landscape that I live in. So for me, that connection to community is simple because I'm always connected to the iwi of the people that I'm related to, but also to the landscapes that I settle in. I know where those bones are in that landscape. So therefore, when I'm living in that landscape, I know who I am as an individual, as well as alongside a collective of people. But that reinforces my identity and teaches me how to live and what to do. It's interesting, I've heard a couple of times that word aroha, aroha as in love, aroha as in giving. But the root word in that is ha. And ha is breath. So when we talk about aroha, we're not just talking about an affectionate connection to people or an affinity to. We're talking about how we share breath with people, with the landscape, with all of that naturally occurring phenomenon that sits around us. So, in that conversation around community, around aroha, around being embedded in a place and letting that place inform who you are and how you breathe together.
Just before we come to Matt and give him a couple more minutes, one of the questions that came up on Menti, and by the way, you can upvote questions. So if someone already asked your question, vote for a question you'd like to hear more from. One of the questions, and I think you've covered it, but do we need to delve deeper, Bill, is to how can we use that Maori knowledge to empower us and sustain us through this regenerative journey, which I think comes from some of what you said.
That's a massive question, and you can call me Ron if you want.
Oh, Ron, sorry.
Ah, sweet as.
What about Shirley?
They can surely call me Bill. That is fascinating, and I've spent 10 years, or 12 years lecturing at Otago Polytechnic, and before that at the university. In that amount of time, in that period of time, I've come up with this. That's 12 years of your taxpayers' dollars right there. And what that is there is, the unique Indigenous perspective and cultural constructs of the world, the universe and everything that sit in the landscape that we live in, alongside your own cultural constructs and understandings and ideas that we then bring together in a bicultural way. Now, when I'm talking bicultural, I'm going to boil this whole conversation of 12 years down to about 2 minutes. Don't tell anyone else I can do this, otherwise I won't get paid. But when I'm talking about bicultural, I'm talking about bicultural without the hyphen. When we put the hyphen in between bicultural, we say there's a separation between these two cultural constructs. However, when we mix them together, maintain the integrity, the mana of the Indigenous people's ways, thoughts, lifestyles, meta-narratives, etc., and your own cultural constructs, lifestyles, ways of doing things, meta-narrative, that actually in the middle, in that middle space, you create what Homi Bhabha would call a cultural third space. That isn't one or the other, but something that's unique, that exists in a time and a place that leverages off the strengths of both of those narratives. Now, of course, when I'm talking about bicultural, New Zealand's a multicultural society. So bicultural is the Indigenous people and what you bring, wherever it's from and how it fits in, and that uniqueness of that story.
Brilliant. Matt, sorry, I've kept you waiting, but it seemed like a nice segue to bring that in, so please.
Oh, absolutely. Look, no need to apologise there for waiting. I can wait all day and listen. And look, I think what an incredible story to listen to there, and it's so inspirational, and I think what you really get out of it is hope. And I love the fact that we will be a piece of history, and if we start now, we can change this path, and in 50 years, 100 years, and 300 years, historians can write back of what we did here in Queenstown and Wānaka. And then equally, when I think about that piece, the storytelling is so important. And then it's so important where it starts right here in the community first and foremost, because we talk about all those great things that each of us are doing, but we don't know what we're doing. So we have to tell each other first before we can actually tell that story further. And then we can tell that story nationally, and then we can tell it globally, and then we can actually create some change. Because if we're only doing it here in Queenstown and Wānaka, it's not going to save the planet. So we have to tell that story first and foremost with each other, so we know all of those great, great things that we're doing, and we can all do those things, and then tell it to everyone else.
Brilliant. And I think you're right. I mean, that's one of the conversations we've been having today, but it starts at the bottom and it builds up from there. Now, there's two questions here that I'm going to try and bring together for the panel, because I think they're quite interesting. So one is around the idea of the othering of the community and how do we bring those people in, and how do we break that othering. But the other side of this is, what do we do about and this was something that we talked about earlier today, the big 10-ton carbon gorillas in the room, aviation, all of those people. It's like, do we actually send those people out of our community, or do we bring them in and bring them on the journey? So how do we stop othering some groups, and what do we do about some of the groups who are in our community already to do that? Anyone like to grab that particular elephant and start breaking it down and chewing it into small bits at the moment? Or maybe it's a giant mower rather than being told off for using other people's animals all day. So.
So this is something I think that was really at the core and one of the pillars of what WOW is all about, is inclusivity. And I think that we have to think of ourselves in this beautiful boat on a lake, and this boat is Earth and the lake is the universe. Every single person on this planet is on board, so we're all on one team. And some people may not know they're on the team yet, but that doesn't mean that they're not. So we have to treat them with respect as if they are. And then with that, if we look at that emissions intensity, we have to understand with empathy the overwhelming nature of nobody wants to think that they are responsible or a large part, or they have a huge chunk of what has happened to this planet. That is something that psychologically is a huge thing to take in the face. And how do we actually work through it, respecting who they are? And I think Ron talked about it this morning. You can't take that mana away from people because it reduces your own mana. You have to be giving back to them. We have to be listening with empathy to why are they thinking like this, and how can we slowly shift them along while bringing them with us on this journey. But where I would say we need to focus is on the trailblazers and the leaders and the ones who are taking the helm in the boat, and the ones who are raising the and the bilges, and we listen to them and we say, okay, yes, we've heard, and who's manning the boat is not necessarily, and it doesn't need to be everybody, but we do need a significant amount of us, and we do need to do this with empathy.
Other thoughts on the othering and who's in and who's out, and how we bring people in and keep them in? Tim?
Along similar lines, you don't have a community with somebody in it that's not in it. The community is the community. So if I think picking and choosing or throwing rocks at certain segments of the community is just not constructive. Everybody plays a key role in our community, and there are different parts of our local and wider communities that are higher carbon emitters than others because of the work that they do. But if you break down that work, there's a lot of that work which is essential to having our community surviving. For example, talking about aviation, helicopters fight fires. They also do search and rescue. They also provide access to remote areas. They also help DOC provide conservation efforts. DOC couldn't do anything near the work that they do without access to helicopters. That's not to say that helicopters don't emit a whole bunch of carbon. They absolutely do. And helicopter operators wish that wasn't the case. They would love that not to be the case, and as soon as technologies catch up to be able to reduce those, I know they are more than keen to adopt those technologies as soon as possible. But it's like, driving vehicles. If I ask the question, how many people here drive a car that is powered by fossil fuels, I'll bet just about every hand would go up. Or have you ever flown internationally? All of these things are part of the reality of where we are at the moment. It's not to say that we can't do better, and we should do better, and we will work to do better together. But I think throwing rocks at individuals within a community doesn't make a community.
That's a great point. And that other side of it, those people who've been othered and shut out of the conversation so far, how are you thinking that you'll be bringing those people in with the journey that you're going on at Lake Wānaka Tourism?
So they're already coming along. There's an assumption that they're not. It's not the case. I mean, I'm sure there are some that maybe are sceptical. Just like there are some in all parts of the community who may be sceptical of a change in direction that they're not used to. But again, we can't assume that that's the case. And the people in those industries that I've spoken to are absolutely on board. It's just they are struggling, like we all are, to get these technologies fast enough to be able to adopt them to make the really tangible changes that we can. But there are other things, ways that they operate, which are being adjusted already to try and be as efficient and as effective as possible. Airbus has actually, in the process of developing an electric helicopter, and you'll probably have seen in the news multiple stories about electric aviation vehicles and aircraft which are being developed, and hydrogen-powered aircraft, biofuel-powered aircraft. There's a whole bunch of work that's going on. But again, I'm just wary of throwing rocks at certain organisations or certain individuals or certain industries when we're not actually considering the full picture.
Brilliant. Matt, you?
Yeah, look, we're all in this together, and there's no rock throwing. And so it's about being inclusive and bringing everybody in and bringing everyone on the journey. And I think equally, as we move in this journey and take people with us, they will follow. And it wasn't that long ago, you'd go to a bar and you'd come home smelling of smoke. You don't anymore. My daughter saw someone on the street recently and said, "What's that fire stick?" I said, "What?" And she was referring to a cigarette because she'd never seen one. And that's pretty cool when you have your kid who's this age now, and she's 12 at the time and hadn't seen a cigarette before, So change can happen, and that's what we're doing as a community, is changing. And it does start with the little things, and I know a lot of my team have heard this, and it can start as simple as the coffee cup. And I think here in Wānaka we've been really proud that when you go to a cafe, you don't get given a takeaway coffee cup. So it was a small step, but it's one of those small steps, and it's a small step that everybody can take. And then from there they go, well, what else can I do? And you start taking them on that journey, and all of a sudden they're like, this is fun, and I want to be part of it. And so I think we can just keep moving. And I think, Tim, to your point around aviation, we don't have those solutions today, but we need to adopt them as soon as we can.
It's interesting, sort of thinking about periods of time and taking people along for the journey, and in that aspect of social sustainability and cultural sustainability, where I think about that iwi Māori cultural sustainability that we've been pushing for years, and saying actually we are a legitimate part of this community, of this society, and our ways of thinking and doing have got relevance and have got credibility. And we're starting to sort of come around to that idea now that actually if we look after the world, we should be okay. But it was interesting listening to the speaker saying, well, let's look at 2030, and I thought, well, shit, that's only a generation away. And it's not actually. It's only 8 years.
Yes.
I'm not very good at maths. That's another thing your tax dollar hasn't gone to, is me doing maths. But my point in there is when I think about, I quite often think about my mum. And in 1977, I remember my mum, she was on Waitangi Day in 1977, sitting in the front window 4ZA radio in Invercargill doing some weaving. And I said to her, I was a wee bit of a precocious young fellow, I said, well, what's this all about? It's not going to change anyone with you just doing this weaving in this radio station. Mum said, boy, and I remember this, boy, you've got to start somewhere. And in 1977, in Invercargill, to push a cultural agenda, sitting in the radio station weaving was as far as you could go, eh? So, I suppose when I'm thinking about this conversation, all I can think is you've got to start somewhere, and there are 2 generations, we'll see some more traction. 1977, you guys do the maths, you're much better than me. 1977, and stick that on to where we are now, and we'll be somewhere else. So It is a journey. It takes a while, but hell, we've got nowhere else to go, have we?
Ron, I love that you use the time frames, sorry, Carolyn, because I think 8 years is 2030, but 8 years ago, you go to the supermarket here in Wānaka, and you were given a plastic shopping bag, and we took it. That was very much the norm, and I remember very much it was a groundswell here, and then all of a sudden it became law. So that was 8 years ago. We had plastic shopping bags still, and it was legal. Now they're not legal. So
It was compulsory.
But you had to take your groceries home in it pretty much. But I think that's the point, is that it can happen quite fast and can happen really fast when we start this momentum and start doing little things and taking people on that journey.
And likewise, in 1977, you wouldn't have been able to find a plastic shopping bag for love nor money. It would have been wrapped in newspaper or a paper bag.
Yeah, and that cycle. The reason I was laughing is one of the questions is around this idea of the time frame, and it says this regeneration. It sounds great, but is it a bit airy-fairy? Have we got time to do that, given the size of the challenges we're facing? You know, is this incremental step? So is that change of 6 to 8 years? Is it quick enough? Can we get there quick enough to solve the problems that we've got? So. Gee, thanks to the person who asked that question.
But actually, I think this is a really good question. And right now, if you turn on the news, all you see is climate change weather. And it's weather. And we all know where it's coming from. It's climate change, so we must do something. And I think the conversation is so normalised now. Everybody is talking about climate change. No one denies climate change. You cannot deny climate change. It's there. And so it's what can we do about it? So I think if you go back 8 years ago, that was I don't know about that, where climate change it's just happening, and we see it every day, and it's costing us, whether it's on your house insurance or whatever it is, it's costing us all thousands and millions of dollars a year. So climate change is the thing that actually is real. It's there on the news. People are having those conversations. They want to get involved. They want to make a difference.
I'm going to take a rural analogy here, because it was really interesting being at the Climate for the Rural Sector discussion this morning, and I think that cross-pollination of sectors needs to happen more. So if we go into this natural system, when you're planting a field, you've got a lot of work to do to actually build up the soil before you really get any results. So you build the soil, you put in the fertilizer, you make sure that you are putting all the love into what is below ground. So if we think of at the moment, we're in a period of transition. We're in the sowing the seeds period, and I don't know if anyone sows their seeds into their garden. I do. You think nothing is happening. So there's this latency period in change when you are planting seeds. And it takes time for those first little buds, like coffee cups, like plastic bags, to actually start to sprout. And they're the first ones. What will happen afterwards will suddenly be that nothing happens in a generation and everything changes overnight. We saw that with COVID. So we've got to be patient with this. We've got to understand where in history we are sitting. We are sitting in such a unique period where we have the ability, if we work together and work as one, to actually shift the dial. So we're not going into business as usual. We're not going down the drain. We're actually planting seeds. So every one of us here in this room, every one of us listening online, has to think about what are the seeds that I am going to plant. And I'll take one example of this that happened with the first WOW Summit. So first WOW Summit was getting together, and the Suck Free campaign started off. It's now in Queenstown. But from the back of that, and it was a discussion down at Alchemy, down at one of the cafes here, and it was people from the building sector that got together. And they said, we want to do something too. We've seen the hospo sector, we've seen what they've been doing. What can we do? And they thought 3 priorities. They thought mental health, waste, and embodied carbon. Ben Ackland was at that discussion, and I don't know if anyone knows Ben, incredible part of our community, and his idea was to join 2 of these up. And he said, look, there's a problem with waste, and there's a problem with mental health. I think I've got a solution. I've been mulling this over for a while. I want to test this idea out on you. And he talked about the Wānaka Community Workshop. Now, 5 years later, that workshop has been up and running for a year and a bit. So that was a seed that was planted in a conversation 5 years ago. It germinated, grew, and is now a flourishing part of our community. So respect, have patience, wait for the latency, sow seeds. Sow lots of them. Not all of them are going to germinate.
Ron, did you want to add anything?
No, sweet as, that's good.
I guess I'm just going to run through some of the other questions, but I want to touch on one of the things that Damon did talk about there, which is the obituary by last 20 tweets, but maybe not by the last 20 tweets. I'm going to ask that question that I said I would really love to ask, which is, what do you see that your obituary should be saying around what you're doing in your current roles and how you're working in this space, and what is the gap between that and what's actually happening, and how do you see that going? So anyone like to tackle their obituary?
Thanks, Karen.
Sorry.
I'm going to take some. Actually, I'm talking too much. Ron, did you want to take that one? I'll just take something that Paul Hawkins said on Wednesday night. And my son, 16-year-old son, came back to me with this. He said, if we are in this generation of change, and our purpose is not to help the team along and drive it towards this future that we can all see, but it's there and it's a little bit foggy and we don't quite know what it is, but we know we want to get to that other side. Why are we here? And I think that he took it and he said, but Mum, that's not what I want to do. It's not what I want to do. I tried to turn it around for him because I know he has other dreams and other ways that he wants to do it. But I think it's about how do we find our purpose and how do we find our place on the boat and how do we navigate our way into giving back that more than we're taking away. And each one of us is going to have to find that purpose in our own way and in our own style. And I think that comes back to the diversity of what we need as well. We do not want a monoculture in our society, in anyone, but all of us need to find that purpose. So I hope, and for my sake, that my obituary says that I live by my purpose for my whole life, and that is to drive impact in this community.
Thank you. Matt, you?
Look, with Monique there, you've got your own death and then you've got the organisation. So I will die and people will say what they're going to say and I will live by my purpose and do a good job. The organisation will not die. It'll continue and it has much work to do and it cannot die. It's our job to ensure that it doesn't because it's got a lot of work. So I can't think about that. But what we must do when we're communicating is just be honest and with integrity, and then it's fine. It doesn't matter because if our last 20 tweets are honest and truthful and full of integrity, it's fine. People can say what they want to say when we die then.
That's a great answer, Matt.
I actually I think about this quite a bit, kind of morbid, isn't it? I think about my own obituary. But within that as well, I think what I would like printed about me was Ron Bull, his grandfather was all right, and his grandchildren are okay as well. Now, the reason I say that is because every single thing that I do and everything that I say, I think about how is that going to impact upon those people that were here before me and those that are coming after. Now, if I make a complete idiot out of myself, and I've done that, believe it or not, at certain times in my life, the worst thing for me is people to think, oh, that's Jimmy Bull's grandson. What kind of a grandfather was he to let that boy do that? I still think of myself as a boy. What to let that boy do that? So it actually, what we call takahi's the mana, the integrity of my grandfather, of those people before me, by my actions. I can do that. I've got the choice of doing that. But also with those people that come after me, I've got twin granddaughters. And I don't want people to look at them and go, oh, hey, that's Ron Bull's granddaughters. You know what they're going to be like. You've seen that, I'll let you fill the gaps in there. You've seen that fella. I'd like them to say, yeah, they're okay. Because that fella, he made sure that everything he did, he thought about the integrity, the mana of those coming after him. So for me, as long as my obituary says, oh, he was all right, and his granddad was okay, he must have been all right, and look at they're good as well, then that's good for me. That makes me happy, thinking that I've done everything that I can to ensure that the integrity of everything that comes before me was in place and enhanced if possible, and for everything coming after me was enhanced.
Tiff, did you want to add anything?
It was really along the similar lines to Ron, actually. Very similar lines, but I was just, if my obituary was going to be my last 10 tweets, it's going to be a pretty short obituary. I've never posted a tweet in my life. But it's also, for me, it's about, again, to what Ron was saying, you know, I talked about my grandparents, and we talk about our kids and grandkids and future generations, what they're going to think of us. But what I would love is if I can leave this place knowing that people have started to think every time they make a decision, especially a significant decision in their business or their life or what they're going to do, what they're going to do now, what they're going to do in the future, if they ask themselves, how is that going to affect not only just me and not only just my business, but how is that going to affect the people around me? How is it going to affect my family? How is it going to affect the other people in my community? And not just the people, but the places that we love, the things that we love to do, the te taiao, the wildlife and the natural places. How's it going to affect what's my impact on the climate? So it's just getting people to stop and think and ask themselves the question when they make a decision. It's really important to understand how it's going to affect me and my business, but also to understand what the other impacts on others will be, and factoring those into those decisions. I think I would be happy with that.
Brilliant. Does everyone feel like we have time for one more question?
Depends on the question.
Okay, well, I've got two options for you. Now, there's a question in there around how we put people and well-being at the heart of this rather than just economic measures. So I guess the question I thought there was we could talk again about the question I asked Damon and address it here, which is what are the goals, what are the measures for success that we might have? The other one that I quite often ask, and I'm going to let all of you vote on which question you'd like to answer, that I quite often ask people at the end of a stakeholder interview is, what are the questions I've asked that I haven't asked you that I should have asked you? So which of those would you like to answer? Data and measurement or the question I didn't ask? Ron?
Yeah, let's go for the measurement question. And it was fascinating listening to the whole that dialogue around how we measure, and measurement is very much from a scientific perspective. It's measured against a set of criteria, sometimes an arbitrary set of criteria that says you've done well or you're doing okay, etc., etc. I prefer to think about how we evidence. So instead of measure as such, how we actually evidence change. And one of the conversations that I had that sort of drove home to me the whole that conversation around what's his name, Descartesian binaries, dualities. When René Descartes was thinking about the mind being that thing, that imagination that sort of wanders off, but the body being that scientific evidence, proof of what we do. And I remember one of the old people, she's still alive, and I'll refer to her as an old person because she's older than me, I'm just a boy. But with that, I was talking to her one day, and I said, predicting climate change, predicting what's happening in the water, predicting the health of the fish, of the power, knowing when you should go out and how many you should get. I said, it's a big scientific question, it's a conundrum. And she goes, no, you don't need to measure that. What you need to do is evaluate and go and lie in the water. She said, that's what I do. I lie in the water. And if I can see the seaweed just moving slowly and it's just moving my body slowly, I know I'm going to be okay out there. If it's sandy, I can't see anything, then I know that I'm probably not going to catch anything. If I see a big shadow heading towards me, I get the bloody hell out of it. But with that, it imparted on me that wisdom of, I think, therefore I am, and evaluating, or the measuring, as opposed to I feel, therefore I understand, and evidencing that. So in that conversation, that duality come to mind. That measurement against that evaluating, and I feel, therefore I understand.
Fantastic answer, thank you.
Did I choose the right one then, did I?
This is choose your own adventure, guys, so go for it.
After having worked in gathering data and looking at indicators in terms of employment indicators, I think that we need to be really wary of just looking at hard data, because it can sometimes really drive bad outcomes. And we need to put a focus more, and I agree totally with you, Ron, on in the intangibles. What are the intangibles that, and Damon referred to it as soft measures, you know, the smile on the farmer's face and the satisfaction in his well-being. And we are shifting towards this. And what I see this shift as being is a shift to the wisdom and that trusting ourselves and our instincts in a much better way, because we're working too much with our heads. And I think that, Ron, what you're saying is we need to start trusting our gut, but also our hearts. And when we start to do that, we're going to have a much deeper understanding of the natural world as well, because they're not driven by data. We're trying to measure it. That creates it as being the other. How do we use the roots that are in our feet and in our body and our fingers to actually plunge in and record the intangibles?
So I think there's so much data out there, and there's a lot of data for data's sakes, and so having one point of truth is really important. But then you've got to decide what you're going to do with that data. And I think actually one of the hardest bits of data, and we should do it more and more, is being a good listener and just asking that simple question, how are you? Because sometimes we don't like the answer that we hear back, but listening to that answer and being there and being able to help and support those people, and that's how we're going to hear from our community. How are you?
And it's interesting, recently I was at a debate in a regional tourism conference in Australia, and somebody said, don't ask that question unless you really want to know the answer. And she said, she banned her staff in her hotel from putting that question in. She said, do not do it unless you're prepared to hear. So are you prepared to hear someone say, well, actually I had a shit day, you know, my cat died or whatever. So I think it's a really
And then what do you do
question.
with it when they've had a shit day? I've had a shit day, and go, oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then you've got to be able to offer some help and empathy and support and help. And so it is one of the hardest questions, and I think it's a great bit of data. It's just asking people, how are they? How's your day? And finding out. And then we'll find out how our community is.
Yeah. So the how are you is a measure. Tim, anything to add as a...
I think it's all been pretty well covered. And I think, you know, what we were talking about, the stuff that you can count is helpful and useful in a number of areas, but it's the stuff that's felt and the intangible stuff that is much harder to measure and evidence, but it's no less important. So the only way we're going to be able to gather that information is by communicating, by talking with each other and having open, honest conversations. That must have been my timing bell there.
Well, I've stretched the audience patience, but I think that's because, and I hope you agree and understand that what we're having are literally the conversations of our lives. So I'd like to thank all of you, Matt, Monique, Tim, Ron, Shirley, for sharing your insights, stepping in and taking the journey that you've all started on, that Damon's talked about. And it really was wonderful. I really do feel very honoured to be part of sharing that conversation with you today and seeing what you're doing. And I just think it's so exciting. And I want to take the point that Damon made, which is give yourselves, all of you, a pat on the back for doing it, because the hardest thing is that first step to change. So thank you all so much for being a great community. I've really loved feeling the vibe of coming here, and a great set of leaders who know that leadership is not distant but close and part and engaged. So thank you very much. Thank you for your understanding, and thanks for picking me up so early.
I was thinking about letting you roll all the way through.
No, please don't, because that would have been worse.
Thanks, Ron. Yeah, it's been fun, wasn't it?
Finished karaoke.
Oh no, Dick's not there.